Hello, and welcome to episode 8 of Social Skills is Canceled. I'm trying something a little bit new where I am going through a calendar of common days here in the United States. So on this calendar, it has something for every day. So, for example, there might be National Ice Cream Day or Take Your Dog for a Walk Day, all kinds of random things 365 times throughout the year. So, what I'm doing is I am using this calendar to come up with topics for the podcast. It is not difficult for me to come up with topics for the podcast. I have a whole list of all kinds of things that I like to talk about. But what is really difficult for me, which you can see if you've been following the podcast from the beginning, is actually getting episodes recorded and uploaded and sent out. That's really difficult for me. So by doing this idea where I incorporate days that are already set, it gives me a schedule. It gives me a timeline. It gives me a time when things have to be done in order to be ready to go by that day. So that's a new plan here on the podcast. Also on our YouTube channel where you can watch these in video format if you prefer. So first up on our list is the concept of humor. This is for August 16th. August 16th is Tell a Joke Day. So in this episode, I'm going to talk all about how our kiddos, our neurodivergent kiddos who struggle with social awareness, why humor is something that can be really challenging for them. It can be challenging for them to get. It can be challenging for them to give to others. And so we're going to talk all about that on this episode of Social Skills is Challenged. So stick around. Welcome to the Social Skills is Canceled podcast. I'm Steph, and I'm a recovering social skills teacher. I created Starfish Social Club so I could spend my time teaching neurodivergent kids and teens to be more socially competent, confident, and connected without relying on compliance, punishments, or just expecting my kids to be more normal. The outcome? Happier, healthier relationships with themselves, their peers, and their parents. Welcome to the club. As I mentioned, August 16th is Tell a Joke Day. At Starfish Social Club, our big thing is helping kids choose the reputation that they want for themselves. And then we teach them the things that they can do to create that reputation. And also the things they might be doing currently that are taking them further away from that reputation. It's pretty common for our students to engage in behaviors, habits, routines, whatever, that they think are getting them closer to the reputation that they want, but are actually moving them further away. So in our program at Starfish Social Club, we focus on both. What are the things that we can start doing, and what are the things that we might want to think about not doing anymore? So we have a whole lesson in our program, one whole week where we talk specifically about having a reputation for being funny. Not all of our students care about having a reputation for being funny. We also talk about kind and smart, and those are pretty much 100% with our students. Funny is a little bit less. Not everybody really cares about it, but we don't want any of our kids to have a reputation for being not funny. Some of our kids don't laugh at anything. Some of our kids get annoyed when they try to be funny. So we also want to avoid that. We don't want them to have a reputation for being not funny. One of the reasons that humor can be difficult for our kiddos is because we tend to be black and white thinkers, right? We tend to think in terms of all or nothing, this or that. There's not a lot of gray in the brains of people who are neurodivergent, especially with autism, a little bit less so with ADHD, but we tend to be pretty black and white. That makes some forms of humor difficult to understand. Puns can be difficult to understand because they require you to think about something in more than one way at the same time. So I notice a lot of my students just don't really understand puns. Other wordplay jokes, jokes that require prior knowledge that our kids might not have are difficult for them to understand sometimes. Jokes that have to do with pop culture, references that our kids might not always get. So there's just a lot of factors that go into why humor can be difficult for some of our students. When it comes to being a humorous person, one of the hangups that our kids come across is because we are so black and white, we tend to be rule followers. And one of the big ways I see this play out when it comes to humor is that our kids will pay attention to what the group thought was funny, and they will try to emulate that. So I can think of multiple examples where one student said something, just maybe even randomly said something, and the other kids thought it was funny and were laughing about it. And so another student immediately started saying the same thing. So they watched this situation, they heard what the first student said, they saw that the other kids thought it was funny. So because we're black and white and because we're rule followers, we now have a new rule that this phrase is funny to other people. So then student B picks up this phrase that was just said and starts to say it. Maybe starts to say it too much. Maybe is still saying it 2 weeks from now. Is probably still saying it even though nobody else is laughing. And might even continue saying it even after people ask them to stop. It's because of this black and white thinking, this tendency to be rule followers. We've just picked up on a rule that this is funny because we saw it being funny. We saw other people appreciating the humor. And so now someone will come in and try to continue carrying it on. It can even happen with things that we say or do. We may say or do something one time and notice that somebody laughs. And so we keep doing it over and over because we noticed that it made somebody laugh that one time. So that can be a hard thing for our kiddos to understand. Sometimes there's a phrase called was funny once. Things are funny one time, maybe 2 times. After that, the only way things continue to be funny is if they become an inside joke. So that's one thing that can happen. At Starfish Social Club, the kids have multiple inside jokes going on that started with something somebody said or did, and the kids just keep talking about it and keep laughing about it. Some of them have been going on for years. But they're only funny to the kids who know what they're about, right? That's the criteria for an inside joke, is when a new student comes in, the new student doesn't see the humor in it because they don't have the history, they don't understand. So that's really the only way that repeating something over and over is still funny, is if it becomes an inside joke to the group, which usually is not the case. If you wonder why your kiddo says things that other people have said, or repeats things off of TV, or quotes characters from movies where they're saying something funny, this is why. It's because they have picked up on the rule that this thing made people laugh. And so they keep trying to do this thing. It's actually a really great way to learn from our environment. It shows, if your kiddo is doing this, it shows that they're paying attention to their social world. Unfortunately, humor just doesn't really work in such a predictable way. We can't really take something that somebody said and say it ourselves and have the same outcome. If you've ever tried to tell a joke that you saw, maybe if you saw a comedy special and you tried to relay a joke to a friend, it just doesn't relay the same way. It's the same effect that our kids get. So there's a little bit of insight into why telling jokes can be really difficult for a lot of our kids, is because they get a little caught up in what worked one time and they try to kind of latch on to that. Another thing that I've noticed with my students is that they don't really have a concept of people being different ages. This I actually just really noticed recently. During game time, we have all ages of students there from 7 to 22. They're all there together. They can be in different groups, in different rooms. They can choose who they want to play with. But they're all mixed in together. And I've noticed lately that some of the kids who are older do not have a concept that some of the things they're talking about or joking about aren't really appropriate for younger kids. Doesn't mean that they are inappropriate in terms of that they're vulgar or sexual or anything like that. But sometimes they're just things that younger kids have no concept of or don't really understand. So it's not even that it's inappropriate in general. It could be completely inappropriate for their age group. It's just not something that's going to make a younger kiddo laugh, or that a younger kiddo would even be able to comprehend as being funny. So we're really working on helping our kids recognize that as well. Some of our students are in group texts together, and the same, kind of some of the same challenges happen, that they don't realize that in the same group text is maybe an 11-year-old and a 17-year-old. So even though they might not be talking about anything that's inherently inappropriate, just things that an 11-year-old might not have a concept of, or might not have the maturity to think is funny. So we're starting to work on helping our kids recognize what things are funny and what things are appropriate at different ages. And it doesn't mean that you can't talk about whatever you were talking about. We had some kids a few weeks ago talking about, texting girls. A couple of boys in our program were talking about texting girls. Totally appropriate. We just asked them to go to a different room away from the younger kids, because that's just not a topic, for the younger kids to really be exposed to, when that's not something that is appropriate for their age level at that time. So doesn't ever mean that we don't want them to talk about things that are age appropriate. We just want them to recognize that if there are younger kids in the group, we need to keep our topics pretty general, pretty generic, pretty G-rated, to continue the alliteration. So just helping our kiddos be aware, it's really common for kids with social learning challenges to get along with younger kids. It's very common. So if that's the case with your kiddo, you may just want to monitor for that. And it may be something that you need to have some conversations about, that maybe they're trying to use age appropriate humor for them, but it's not landing with the kids that they're hanging out with that are 3, 4, 5 years younger than them. So it's just something to point out, just something to bring up. I find that once I make that connection for a kiddo, it really helps them see things a little bit differently. It's just the fact that they were not aware of it before I brought it up. Another thing that we focus on when it comes to humor is recognizing that not everybody has the same sense of humor. So there are some people who think everything is funny. Anything you say, anything you do, it's funny. There's some people who, most of us are selective in our humor. There's things that we really like and things that just aren't funny to us. For me personally, I love puns. I love them so much. Some of my favorite jokes, actually both of my favorite jokes, are puns, and I can't even tell them without cracking myself up. So I love pun humor, but there's other kinds of humor that just isn't really that funny to me. I don't really care for political humor. So we all just have our own references for what we find funny and what we don't. And then, as I mentioned previously, there are some people who don't really find anything funny. One of the things that we've noticed at Starfish Social Club is potty humor. And we've worked on this for several years, and it kind of has gone all over the place. We've had times where nobody in the group thinks potty humor is funny. They think it's immature. They think it's gross. Then we've had times where everybody who's in the group that day is cracking up because somebody farted. I mean, we've kind of been all over the place. But a couple weeks ago, we had a conversation with our summer camp group because we noticed that some of the kids were intentionally farting in the group. We're talking about farting. We're talking about other people farting. And then there were some of the kids who were just really disgusted and disturbed by the whole thing. So we had everybody come into a room together, and we asked the kids who think farting is funny to raise their hand. And everybody notices, okay, there were 3 of them that day, 3 kids who think farting's funny. Okay, everybody who doesn't think it's funny, raise your hand. I think that day there were 8 of them who didn't think it was funny. So then the conversation became, those of you guys who think it's funny, look at the other kids who have their hands raised. That's who you can talk to about potty humor, about fart jokes. That's who you can fart around. But look at everybody who didn't raise their hand. If you choose to fart in front of them, if you choose to talk about potty humor in front of them, they are not going to think it's funny. They're probably going to think you are annoying, because that is not their sense of humor. And now in this room, we've established that. So now they know that they don't think that's funny. But it doesn't mean we teach our kids to not fart in front of other people or to not use potty humor. It means we teach them how to read the room and find other people who like their same sense of humor. It's really important. It doesn't mean that you can't be who you are. At no point is that the concept that we teach. What we teach is to find other people who share your interests or your humor and go be humorous with them. So it's kind of like selective humor, paying attention to what people find funny and then going and joining that group. That's another cool thing at Starfish, is because we have different rooms, we have different groups, we got all kinds of different stuff going on. If there's a group that's talking about something that one of the kids just doesn't really like inside jokes or fart jokes, they can go join a different group. We tend to get groups who are like really rowdy and rambunctious and groups that are really quiet and calm. So the more kids we have, the more options and opportunities they all have to find other kids who are like them. Another thing to add is that sometimes our students will use shock humor. So this could be talking about things that are inappropriate no matter how old you are. This could be talking about things that would be considered obscene, things that might be gross, things that might be talking about death, talking about sex, talking about body parts, just things that in general make other people feel uncomfortable. So sometimes I'll notice that we'll have students who do this as a way to get other kids to laugh. One of the things that we talk about in our lesson on humor is that just because someone's laughing does not mean they think it's funny. I'm going to say that again because it's super important. And once kids understand that, it can be a game changer. So I'm going to say it again. Just because somebody's laughing does not mean they think it's funny. Sometimes people are laughing at us, not with us. And sometimes people are laughing because what we said or did made them uncomfortable. And laughter is just one of those weird things that happens at inappropriate times sometimes. A lot of us laugh when we're uncomfortable. I personally laugh if I'm this hasn't happened to me in a long time, fortunately, but previously I would have really heated arguments and discussions with someone in my life. And at times I would start laughing, but it was because I was just so uncomfortable in that situation. Now that I'm not in that situation anymore, it doesn't happen to me anymore. But helping our kids understand that just because someone's laughing doesn't necessarily mean they think something's funny. So one of the cool things about Starfish Social Club is the kids give each other feedback. We had a new student that started a couple months ago, definitely was in this trap. She would talk about sex. She would talk about body parts. She would talk about death, just really things that other kids might kind of snicker at, but not because they think it's funny, right? And so they started giving her a lot of feedback. She was being asked to leave the group at times because she was talking about things that the other kids just did not want to talk about. And we made significant progress over the course of the summer because she was able to get feedback from other kids. And then we were able to teach her more socially appropriate ways to interact with other kids so that she can start to make some authentic relationships. So those are all kinds of different challenges that our kiddos have when it comes to humor. You can see why humor can be really difficult for our crew. A couple more things I want to add to that. Code switching is a really important thing to keep in mind here, especially for those of you guys who are parents and who are listening to this to benefit your kiddos. Code switching has to do with adopting different sets of behaviors depending on the context. We all code switch. Some of us do it in a more extreme way than others. But it could be, do you act differently around your spouse than you do around your boss, right? Do you act differently? One great example is if you're on the phone, would people that know you well have a general idea of who you're talking to, right? We tend to talk differently to different people, whether it's your kid, whether it's your partner, whether it's a friend, whether it's your mom. We just tend to talk differently to different people. So that's a form of code switching. Our kiddos tend to really be bad at code switching because, again, we are rule-based. So once we learn that this is the rule for interacting with people, our kids tend to just kind of stick to that. Okay, so they don't really change the way they behave or the way they speak around different groups of people. Okay, so one of the ways this can be really challenging for our kids when it comes to humor is that in your family, if you have certain things that are inside jokes in your family or things that your family just really finds funny, your kiddo will think that everybody finds that funny or that that's something to share with everybody. And I've had a couple times with a couple different kids where this was pretty rough. They said something that's an inside joke in their family, but the person they said it to found it really offensive. In another situation, it was a student who just had one certain type of humor that he and his dad shared. But when he talked to me that way, it was pretty awkward. So just be mindful of the jokes and the humor that you have in your family. Okay. There's two different ways that we can handle code switching. For our kiddos who are really black and white and really rule bound and really struggle, my suggestion is to limit the amount of code switching that is required of them. So don't have inside jokes that would be inappropriate for them to say around other people. Don't talk about things that you wouldn't want them to share with other people. For those kiddos who really just can't really grasp the concept of code switching, don't require them to do it. Unfortunately, this means taking away some of those personal things in our family, but it also means alleviating some of the burden off of our kids when it comes to how they interact with other people. Even things like, this doesn't have to do with humor, but it has to do with code switching. Do you expect your kiddo to shut the door when they go to the bathroom at home? You know how I can tell if you don't? Because they come to Starfish and don't shut the door when they go to the bathroom. Okay, so that's a great example of code switching. If your kiddo really struggles with that, don't expect them to do so much code switching. Have the same expectations at home that they would have in public. Things like, is your kiddo allowed to take food off your plate? If they are, they're probably going to do that in other situations as well. So little things like that. You can kind of take a day and just analyze your kiddo's choices throughout the day. And notice if there's any of them that may be an issue if they're doing it in class at school or with friends in the neighborhood, or even on a date if your kiddo is old enough for that. Okay, so just kind of thinking about the habits, the routines, the humor that you guys have at home, and are those appropriate for them to be doing in other situations? For your kiddos who are a little more flexible, a little more adaptable, just talk about the concept of code switching. You can talk about how this is what we do at home, but when you're on a date, this is what it would look like. Or when you're hanging out with friends, it might look like this. Or when we're at a restaurant, it looks like this. So for kiddos who have the ability to understand that, it's definitely a great conversation. Because again, as they get older, we want them to be able to code switch. We want them to be able to feel comfortable having a more professional presence at work, a more casual presence around friends, right? A different presence if they're out on a date. We want them to be able to code switch. So if we feel like they're able to understand that concept, we definitely want to talk to them about it. Our next episode will be on August 25th because that is Kiss and Make Up Day. Oh, I have so much to say about this. We're going to talk about the concept of apologizing and also the concept of over apologizing, which to me is a bigger issue for our kiddos than not apologizing. So that'll be our next episode, Kiss and Make Up Day. I'll see you guys then. Thank you for joining us. If you aren't already part of our community, you can find us online at www.starfishsocialclub.org, on Facebook at Starfish Social Club SATX, as in San Antonio, Texas. You can also send an email to hello@starfishsocialclub.org, and my amazing right-hand man, Ramiro, will get back to you. Finally, I would love it if you would rate and review us. Not because I need you to like me, that's social awareness, but because feedback helps me grow. And because ratings and reviews help other parents find us as well, which means I get to help more kids. And that's the reputation I'm out to create for myself. I'll see you next time.